Welcome, friend. I'm TK, your tour guide to the past, and you are listening to For the Love of History, the podcast where we talk about world history, women's history, and weird history. And today we have a very special guest. We have Hannah Herrick, the archeologist, the PhD candidate at Simon Fraser, and an expert in ancient technology like concrete, pottery, and metal. And today, Hannah has offered to come onto the podcast and tell us all about her experience as an archaeologist and talk about concrete. And before you click off, okay, concrete is very exciting. You're gonna learn so much, and you're definitely gonna be a concrete stan after this episode is over. Hannah can confirm that she has converted me into a concrete lover. So thank you so much for joining us today, Hannah. I really appreciate you being here.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I love a good chance to make people feel weird about how much I love concrete. So
you're that person at a party that's like, hey, have you heard about concrete?
Opens up the big jacket.
Yeah. Just look at all of this. It's so funny. So Hannah is here to tell us not only about her research with concrete, but kind of what it's like to be an archaeologist, to peel back the curtain a little bit and let us know what her experience is like. And let's just get started with that right away, Hannah. So how did you become an archaeologist?
So this is kind of a silly story. I always feel silly when I tell this story. But back when I was applying to university as a small child many years ago, I applied to a bunch of universities all over the place and didn't get into a single one, which was a sad time for me then. But, I kind of decided maybe this isn't what I should be doing. I had applied as a biology major. So I was just kind of thought to myself, well, maybe this is a sign from the universe or what have you, and I should do something else. So I applied to one of the in-state universities. I was living in Arizona at the time. And so I applied to the University of Arizona. And at the time, their online application listed the majors alphabetically. And you will note that archaeology starts with A. And so I got past like accounting and agriculture and Arabic, and I was like, okay, archaeology, good enough. And it ended up, kind of attracting me from that point because it was this lovely mix of history and science, even though I didn't fully understand that at the time. But so I did my degree there. I changed my major a couple of times. I'd studied Russian for 3 years, which is not terribly useful to my everyday life at this point. But ultimately, I ended up graduating with a degree in archaeology. And after this, I can sort of describe my career trajectory as stumbling on a bunch of random opportunities that seemed like a reasonable idea at the time. And so it goes kind of like this and in weird, unexpected places. But, it makes it look like I was trying to do this all along. I ended up having the opportunity to do a master's at the University of Arizona as well, but in geosciences, which doesn't necessarily sound like it would be the natural next step to archaeology, but it was because I did my master's degree at the institution at the university, which is called the Laboratory of Tree Ring Research. It is, in fact, where tree ring dating was invented over 100 years ago. Yeah.
What?
And
oh my gosh.
I learned that. And it was this fabulous mixture of science and climate and ecology and trees, because of course who doesn't love trees?
Yeah.
And archaeology, because actually part of the reason that tree ring science came about and was sort of formalized was because of archaeology. They wanted to use the tree rings to date things. So cool. I did that, and then sort of I ended up doing something a little different and going back to archaeology as my home department, because someone said, hey, you should go and study with this guy at this university. And so I did a Zoom, or maybe at the time it was still Skype, but Skype in the old days, a Skype interview with the professor who is now my sort of advisor. His name is Francesco Berna, and no surprise, he is from Italy. But it sounded like it would be a really good fit in terms of the things we were interested in. Because for my master's research, I did a lot of research about how the ancient people from Sudan were making huge quantities of metal without having a bunch of wood because they're in the desert.
Yeah.
And so here at my current research for my PhD, I've ended up asking a similar question about a different technology in a different place. And so what I'm looking at now is how the ancient people of Cyprus made what we would call basically concrete or cement from the bits and bobs from their local environment and what that means. And so what has always really fascinated me about ancient technology is that I'm a DIY person. I make stuff. If there's an opportunity for me to try to make something, I'm going to do it. Like, here's a quilt that I made. And I've got this one I made. I've got earrings that I made, and I made that quilt. And so I love to make stuff. I love to try new arts and crafts things. And it really gets me wondering, right, so if I can go onto, the internet, I can rent a book, I can watch a bunch of YouTube videos to learn how to do something, which is amazing. But, and I can order things and have things sent to me and go to shops and pick up the materials that I need. But how are people doing that when, it's the Bronze Age? You don't have the internet.
I don't think Amazon existed.
So, and that's, to me, I can really put myself into the shoes of someone from the past who's making something and doing something and creating something. And so that's what really sort of gets me going about type of research that I do. And especially, we have everything that we get, all of the acquisitions that we acquire, the materials that we use are for the most part imported. And so when you're looking at a different world before industrialization, where you have to use what you have or use what you have to acquire things that are slightly farther away, it's a totally different game. And I'm always wondering, well, they did this, they wove this thing. I wonder if I could weave something like that. And, so on and so forth. And archaeology is just the avenue that I'm choosing to do it. Because archaeology is all about, and this is where it differs a bit from history, is that history, you have texts, you have records of different kinds. Archaeology, the primary source that you're using to understand what happened in the past is objects, material culture is what we call that, the bits and bobs that are left behind. And most of the time, this is trash. It's like literal garbage. And there's this meme that I saw, or maybe it was a text post, and it was something like, whenever you feel like trash, always remember that a midden is one of the most valuable archaeological resources. And a midden is a trash pile. And so it's you can't read objects. You have to study them in different ways. And there are some people that focus on things like typology and seriology, which is like, all of these jars are shaped like this, and all of these jars have this type of artwork, and they can find out interesting patterns about things that way. And you have people that can focus on ancient language, or basically you can pair any archaeology with just about any topic you can think of, and someone has done it or they will do it. Archaeology of the coronavirus pandemic, that's a thing.
What?
Yeah, it's totally fascinating. People have I think they researched garbage that had been left on the ground in terms of look at where the masks stack up in the garbage pit. And there's this huge, this rather recent, I think it only ended in 2007-ish maybe. There is this project where the garbage of the city of Tucson, Arizona was studied by archaeologists for 15 years to learn more about, it's fascinating to learn more about how people are buying things and using things and throwing things away and how things decay. And it's, you can do archaeology about space. You can do archaeology about psychedelic drugs. You can do, it's anything. You combine archaeology with anything.
Fascinating. I did not know that counted as archaeology.
There's archaeology looks a lot different than I think most people would imagine it's do. Because really, I'm just a regular person. I just have strange interests, and I'm willing to look under a microscope at things for a really long time. I had a local high school student volunteer with me at the lab at the university because he wanted to have volunteer hours. So I had him put on his little lab coat and make this list for me, do this, organize these things, label these things. And he told me that one of the things that he learned two things about archaeology. And one, that there's a lot of labeling, and two, that there's a lot of time waiting around for material to come into you or to be processed. And so it's really just like any other thing. But I think people who are archaeologists have really big imaginations. I think that's a prerequisite, because you have to sort of imagine what this thing you're looking at used to be or used to look like, and what the world that it was conceived in looked like, and who the people were. And it's really deep stuff, but there is some very flashy parts of archaeology, like field work. Spectacular. so much fun. Wander around outside for, however long, getting to literally be the first person to see something in 2,000 years, maybe.
Yeah.
And
That's
you're outside, often in the sunshine, and meeting different people from different places who, have completely different ways of life. And I so value that experience. And that is sort of the glitzy Indiana Jones, ancient Egypt part that can sort of, be popularized with good reason. I mean, the monuments of ancient Egypt are really cool, especially in person. But really, it's just kind of like any other job. I just happen to really, really, really want to look at people's garbage. And that's what gets me going. And then I want to tell everyone that I know, guys, you don't understand. It was so cool.
I feel like now that I know this, archaeologists like mascot should definitely be the raccoon, like the garbage pandas.
The undergraduate student society at my university, they have a raccoon as their logo for the archaeologists, which is too cute. But that's absolutely it. And I myself am like a magpie of sorts. Like I have like my little collections of things around, and
that's so incredible. Yeah, because I know for myself, I thought archaeologist was like the digging in the ground and the Indiana Jones, like running away from the boulder type of thing.
I mean, there is some of that, and that's true.
Yeah.
But there's also a lot of office work and lab work, and if you're cool like me and you do experimental archaeology, you get to make stuff.
That is really cool. And I think the archaeology coolness gets a little bit lost in the Indiana Jonesness when there's lab work and putting the things together. I think that's really, really important and really cool is the puzzling part. Like the finding part, that's so interesting. But the puzzling it all together part, I think, not that I would know, but that I imagine that moment of putting it all together, you're just like, oh yes, like it feels so good.
It really is. And it is science. So archaeology is special. It's a blend of humanities and the science, but like it feels like you're doing science because you have an idea and you investigate the idea, you test it, and then you come up with an answer. And so an answer of some kind, whether that's yes, no, I don't know. But every time I learn something new about the ancient plaster samples that I'm working with, it's just like this huge rush of endorphins. Like, yeah, I learned that this particular rock was in all of the samples and, things like that. It is sort of a puzzle, but this is my hot take, my controversial thought. It is both, in my opinion, the best and worst thing about archaeology is that pending the invention of a time machine, we can never, ever know, really, truly, 100%, how things were in the past, what this was used for, how this was made. All we can do is use the tools that we have to make our best educated guess.
Yeah.
And I love that because it's somewhat freeing. It's like, well, there is no answer. We can never really actually know 100% with total certainty, life or death. So we just try the best that we can, and that's good enough.
Yeah.
But, sometimes it's frustrating for people who do want binary answers. And sometimes I'm like, gosh darn it, I wish that, we understood the language that people were using in ancient Sudan so that we could read these texts they wrote us, but we don't yet.
Yeah. So with your research, let's just jump right into your research. So what kind of things are you doing now? You said you worked with ancient Sudan and bronze. What kind of things are you doing right now?
Okay, so I'm gonna correct you. Some of my previous work was working with iron in ancient Sudan.
Iron, I'm sorry, yeah.
But I also have worked at a site in Sudan during the Bronze Age. So there's metals, things are going around.
Perfect. Okay, thank you for correcting.
I just don't want to misrepresent talents. I'm the bronze specialist, this podcast lady said. No, so I've done that before. I am currently still working at an archaeological site, not right now, obviously, but I'm working on a project at an archaeological site in Sudan. And we'll go back hopefully sometime soon when the political climate is safer for everyone involved, especially the people still there. But for my PhD research, I was kind of handed this project. And it was sort of, well, I have this project that I've always wanted to finish and I just haven't yet. And that's sort of what my supervisor said to me. And I said, well, what is it? And he told me all about what I will tell you about in a moment. And I said,
Mhm.
yes, that is exactly the type of question that I want to ask, because I want to know, they're making plaster. How? Or concrete. I use
Mhm.
the term kind of equivalently because
Yeah.
it's sort of the same thing. Chemically, it is definitely the same thing. But we're
Mhm.
not talking plaster about the walls on your house or like plaster like you get around your arm if you break it. It's a different chemical. But so right now I'm working on my PhD research, and my research focuses on two questions. Question number one, what materials, so what rocks mostly, were the
Mhm.
people from the late Bronze Age site, which is, here's the name, is Kalavasos Ios Demetrios. It's
Okay.
Greek. Yeah, it's a big long name. What rocks were they using to make all of the concrete and plaster that they made at this site, which is sort of an administrative regional site where they did a couple of different things, including make olive oil and store it. So what were they using to make the plaster there? And two, I want to know, what techniques were they using to make the plaster? Specifically, how hot were they needing to heat the rocks to make the plaster, to make it happen? Because that question, the answer to that question, has implications for using natural resources and potentially, how much of the natural resources like fuel and rocks are being used, and whether or not that could impact the environment locally. So I suppose it might be helpful to talk about what plaster is and why I'm talking about rocks.
Yes, please.
So I was like, oh, what you that's good. So we're gonna do a brief chemistry break here. So basically, concrete, plaster, cement. I know these are different words and they do have different technical definitions, but for practical everyday use, we all know what we're talking about. It's the same thing. So that is made of primarily a mineral called calcium carbonate, which is written CaCO3, and that's what it is. And that mineral, calcite, is everywhere. It's very abundant in the Earth's surface. Things that include calcite include rocks. So limestone. Limestone is named such because it makes lime, which you get when you make plaster. Things like the type of rock called chalk, which is made up of thousands of teeny tiny little marine exoskeletons. Corals also have lots of calcite, and humans too have calcite in their bodies too. But we're not making calcite out of humans. That's not really, that would not be very, a very efficient reaction. But also bone does have a certain degree of calcite in it, as well as ash from burning things. So all of these things in different quantities have the mineral calcite. And so in order to make plaster, specifically lime plaster, which is different than gypsum plaster, which is plaster of Paris. It's the thing where you have the circle and you stick a handprint in there as like
so everybody did this in like elementary school. Okay.
So that's plaster also, but it's a different type. It's not the type of plaster that is used in making concrete. It's not today. I know these are some different terms. Do you have any questions? Do you need clarifications?
Nope, I think I'm okay. So we have like calcium, the calcium carbonate, right?
Yep.
And then it's in a bunch of stuff. And then all of that can make concrete plaster, which is essentially the same, but kind of like used in different ways and in different like amounts, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
So
I got it.
You can imagine in your mind that plaster that you stuck your handprint in, because lime plaster looks a lot like that, but it is technically a different substance. It's not as strong. It's not going to be used in construction. So that's why it isn't in the concrete that I'm looking at. So you have your rock, your shell, your coral, whatever. And what you have to do in order to make that reaction happen to make concrete is you have to split apart the molecules. You split apart the calcium and the carbonate. Okay. And you do this by heat. And people that are making concrete today industrially will heat it super, super hot to like 1100 degrees Celsius. Chemically, in a perfect vacuum, this reaction usually is best and happens at about 900 degrees Celsius. Okay. However, depending on what else you have in your mix, in your rock, besides calcium carbonate, the temperature might vary. It might even be as low as 600 degrees Celsius.
Okay.
So you got to heat it. and this part bugs me, I don't know how long it has to be heated for. No one knows. People who write papers about like studying plaster will be like, yeah, we made some experimental stuff and we heated it for half an hour. And some people will say, we made some experimental stuff and we heated it for 4 days. And I'm like, can we decide on this, please? So you have to heat the rock for an undetermined amount of time, but basically you want to heat it enough so that your rock can chemically transform. It looks like a rock still, but instead of calcite minerals, you now have a different intermediary product, which we can call lime, but it's also calcium oxide. So Ca, you had oxygen and it went away.
Okay.
Then this is where it gets fun because you get to add stuff back in.
Ooh.
You add in water. So you mix this with water and it reacts.
That's the video that you sent me, right?
Yeah. But the bubbles, that was me pouring water into my heated up rock and it was bubbling.
Oh my
because calcium oxide is super reactive. It desperately wants to hook up with some hydrogen or some carbon and be more stable. And so by adding that water in, we give it the oxygen back. And it's like, yes. And so it puts off hydrogen gas.
Okay.
And so you have this sort of sludge. To me, it is the texture that the experimental stuff that I have made, and I'll tell you about making that in a moment, is reminiscent of perhaps a Frosty from Wendy's, same color too, which is probably it. And you have this sludge, and you can, spread it out really thin and nice, and you could have a nice thin layer of very fine, pure plaster. This is the kind of thing that like historic and ancient friezes and frescoes were painted on, a really thin layer of white plaster because it's very bright and very durable. Or you can add a bunch of other stuff to it, like this is where it gets crazy, so just bear with me. You can add sand, you can add pebbles, you can add other pieces of broken plaster in there. You can add things like shells or pieces of plant matter or really big rocks or pieces of broken pottery or pieces of mud brick and stir it up to make it a bulkier mixture. And then you lay that out on the ground for a floor, on the vertical for a wall. You can also use it to make a road, depending on what you needed that for. And then the final bit is as it dries, the pasty stuff dries, a further chemical reaction happens where it reacts with the carbon dioxide in the air, become basically essentially a rock again. It becomes calcite again. So it's almost like a cycle. What? So essentially what you're doing, making plaster or making concrete, is you are making liquid rock.
What?
Right? And so this is, should we talk about the history of concrete now? So gas people up about it, or are we talking about research?
Yes, we need to convert people to concrete lovers.
So first off, I'm going to say that we don't know for sure how old the technology of making concrete is, but it is at least 12,000 years old.
Stop it right now. 12,000 years old?
At least 12,000 years old. People have been doing this for this long of time. And the sort of hypothesized, so not proven in any way, first occurrence of plaster that we might have seen would have been maybe, if we can imagine that we're more than 12,000 years ago and we're outside being people from the Epipaleolithic, as we are hanging out and doing whatever ladies like us would do. It's raining, it's storming, and you have a bolt of lightning hit a rock. And so lightning is very hot. And so the hypothesis is maybe that the first time that humans witnessed this would be a lightning strike, where the rock was superheated to start that reaction from calcium carbonate into lime, and then mix with water from the rain to become this like sludge, which then eventually hardened again, right? So if you can imagine that, to me, that's just magical alchemy business.
So cool.
My mind would be blown. And so after that, you have instances of people using plaster, concrete, for different purposes. And so one of my favorite examples in the early days of concrete making was in a time period called the pre-pottery Neolithic. So this is the Neolithic, so people are living in one spot, but they haven't figured out how to make pottery yet. But they do have plaster. So there's people, and it's, I think in a couple of different locations, but primarily it would be in what we know today as Israel. And there are instances of people being buried. But when they're found by archaeologists who excavate these burials later in the near past, we find that their skulls had been removed and decorated with plaster.
What? And
so sometimes the plaster would take their skull and make it back almost transform it back into the face of someone that they love. So some of them have shells for eyes or features on their mouth. And I think it's definitely macabre, but it's like, wow, you're using this synthetic technology, possibly the very first synthetic technology that humans figured out how to make, and you're using it to commemorate someone that you had lost. Like, isn't that beautiful?
It's so beautiful. It makes you want to cry. It's like you have this new technology. You're like, oh, what's the first thing I'm going to do with it? I'm going to reconstruct the face of my loved one. Oh my God, so I can see them. Okay, that is so... That's so cool. I have goosebumps.
That's probably not the very first thing that they did, but it's definitely it's up there.
Yeah, up there.
So, we have instances of things like floors, because concrete or plaster is a really great material for a floor. Mm-hmm. Because what gets broken, busted, cracked, you can just slap on another layer on top. So, and that's how you get spectacular. Yeah, just to fix the corner or whole new layer. And so that's how you get these crazy things. And you can show the picture of the block I sent you where it's like a layer of 14 to 20 floor surfaces all together, because they're like, right, we need to refinish this. And it's really fascinating, because once you get to about the time where the Romans are doing their thing, and people all over the world are making plaster using all sorts of different, local innovations to do so. And when the Romans come in, they're like, right, so we have this soil, this volcanic ash from this volcano. And they figured out that when they mix it in with their plaster mix, that it was better. You could set this concrete underwater. This was called hydraulic lime. And what happened there was that there was some silicates in this ash from this volcano that did a chemical reaction with the calcium carbonate and essentially made it super, super, super sturdy. So that's why you still have crazy things like Roman aqueducts that are still out. And other places, like, for example, China, this is my favorite thing to tell kids when I'm talking about my research. In ancient China, when they were building the Great Wall around 500 CE, they figured out that if they mixed sticky rice into their plaster mix rice, then it would help the concrete be stronger, be better. And it's for the same purpose. It's silicates in the rice. The silicate in the rice helped form these compounds, which made it sturdier. And so it's like, wow, all over the world figuring out the same thing. And, moving on forward into time, the next sort of big thing about concrete is that we have the Industrial Revolution, I think is probably the next big one. And at this time is when humans in England perfect this way of making what we called Portland cement. And this is the cement that we know today. So it's the same exact process. You have a rock, you heat it, you add water, you mix. But they use the specific rock in the right way to make it so it's concrete that we know now. And I mean, you look out and you see concrete outside, it's always got speckles and stuff in it. And so those are the bits and bobs, the rocks. They're modern equivalent of things like potsherds and bricks that get thrown into the mix to make it really, really solid. And so that's sort of the industrialized technique that we've been using for the past 150 years.
What?
But you think about it, this modern technology that we see all the time, I live in a city and there's always buildings being constructed. Yeah. Like the main supports out of, concrete covered supports and things. And look around and you look up, you look at the sidewalks, you look at roads, and it's all concrete.
Yeah.
Concrete today is this statistic I looked up a few years ago. I assume it's still, but the only material on the planet that humans consume more of than concrete is water.
What?
Right?
So crazy.
Right. It's so much. And in fact, the most sort of chemically expensive or resource intensive part of making concrete is that first part, the heating up of the rocks. Yeah. And that is such a prevalent part of the global doing stuff that it makes up something like 8 to 12% of carbon dioxide emissions.
What?
So concrete is everywhere. It's all the time. And it seems really boring. But if you sit and think, well, this is something that humans have been doing for over 12,000 years. It's this legacy of innovation that, to me, it is just, when I think about it, it connects me to people that have been on the planet for at least that long. Yeah. And think about all the different things, the drains, the floors, the Roman aqueducts, the parts of the Great Wall of China, weird sculptures from people making brutalist architecture in the 60s, 70s, it's all concrete and we're all using it. And people even use plaster and concrete to make replicas of archaeological objects. Yeah. For the museum. And so we're using this material that, if you can imagine it, when it was first invented, was probably thought of some kind of magic.
Yeah.
And like, why can't it still be magical today? We're doing science, and like, it bubbles, it makes sounds, it gives off heat. It makes me feel like I've got a witch's cauldron, like stirring up something.
Your little witch with your
My little
concrete.
tiny, like, ceramic crucible that's like this big.
That is so incredible. So I have a question, if it's okay to go back to this. People have been using concrete for 12,000 years. You said that you need to heat up the rock to like 900 degrees Celsius, which for our American listeners, 900 degrees Celsius to Fahrenheit is like, oh my God, it's like 1,652 degrees Fahrenheit. That's very, very hot. How are these people 12,000 years ago heating up this rock?
That's a great question. And so to contextualize, people who are making fires to make their food or stay warm, those fires are about 300 to 400 degrees Celsius.
Okay.
So it's much, much warmer. We do know that the reaction can start at as low as about 500 or 600 degrees Celsius.
Okay.
But it's not very productive. It's like, if your rock is this big, you get a teeny tiny bit of lime, but different ways. And there are some ways we still don't know. So we have the first thing that sort of most people would be able to sort of make a connection with in their mind would be a kiln.
Okay.
So something similar to like a kiln that you would make, fire pottery in. You have a kiln. So you have some type of structure that's tall or exterior that's insulated because it's made from mud brick or what have you, with a bunch of wood charcoal usually, and you have layers and layers and layers of bits of rock. And it's not like big boulders. They're usually broken down, to some extent. So sort of this insulation of the kiln is enough to help sort of get the fire to be hot enough.
Okay.
And, the very first iterations of plaster were not really that long before you have ceramic. And ceramic does need a lower temperature, but it's still this sort of mastery of making things hotter. We also know that there were, and I think it's in Mesoamerica where this was the case, they had hires, to make their plaster. So they would maybe dig out a little bit of a depression sometimes in the earth and then do the same sort of thing, have their rock and their charcoal and their firing bits, and the insulation of the bits of rock and fuel against each other was enough to help sort of keep that reaction to keep being warmer and hotter. So it sounds kind of easy, or it sounds rather difficult for people like us who can just turn our oven. So whatever, I can turn my, little furnace in the lab up to 1,000 degrees, no problem. But, when you think about it, if you just light a campfire, that's already 300 to 400 degrees without trying that hard.
Okay.
So
got it.
Let's get warmer. But we do know that there are some, like, for example, the work that I'm doing at the archaeological site in Cyprus, there's no evidence of kilns. So we don't know what flavor of burn environment they're setting up to make this. Nowadays, they have huge industrial kilns, and there are even historical kilns in places like England and Australia that were used to make lime, to make concrete or cement, that are still there. But there's so much that we don't know, and I think that's kind of fascinating because you can learn so much about how a society, culture, settlement organizes itself by who does what, and how much work it takes. But because we don't know exactly yet, it's a question that I really want to know the answer to, but it varies. There's tons of stuff about Roman lime kilns, though, if that's something that anybody feels a deep passion in their heart that they need to Google. Like, it's there.
That's so interesting. I guess I didn't really realize how hot like campfires, wood fires were, but even doubling that heat seems like a pretty big feat. So that's so incredible. So I mean, we think this is really cool and we love this, obviously. And my delicious donuts out there also love this. Obviously, they have been converted.
They should.
As they should.
You want to be at one with thousands of years of human history? Concrete. That's how.
Exactly, right? And so we think this is important, but what makes this research important? Like, if somebody was like, tell me why this is important, I'm still not a concrete convert yet. Tell me why your research is important and why it's important to know this kind of stuff.
So this is a great question. So for listeners out there who are not in academia, being a scientific researcher, doing a PhD, being a professor, being a researcher at a university involves a lot of trying to convince government bodies to give you money. And so you have to figure out why it is that this is important. And on an emotional, sort of semi-spiritual level, it's the fact that this doesn't connect you to thousands, millions, billions of other humans that are using the same thing now and have in the past, which to me, that's enough. That's good. But if that's not, doing it for you, we can go back to what I said earlier in the fact that we are using so much concrete today. It makes up, again, like 8 to 12% of carbon dioxide emissions globally. So this is something that's a huge impact on our atmosphere, essentially. And it can be looking into how concrete is made can play into learning about how we can make a better sustainable future for humans who are living now in the future, instead of just in the past. So for example, a couple of years ago, I saw a news article about how, such and such a company is making concrete from recycled materials. And I was like, my dude, they've been doing that for thousands of years already. Because, they would break down the bits of concrete from old stuff and be like, right, so we're going to redo this floor, but we have these chunks of, the floor from next door that got broken. We'll just put them in there as filling. And so it's already like, this is something that we could have known if we had cared deeply and been obsessed about concrete like we should. That, it can be a renewable process. It doesn't have to be so heavy. And, when you look at the way that things are done on an industrial scale now, it's all about efficiency and yield, which understandable. These companies need to be able to reliably produce their product for the market. And that's capitalism isn't great, but that's the world we have. But the thing is that maybe we don't need to heat the rocks quite that hot. Maybe we could get away with heating them to a lower temperature if we manipulated the particular additives that we added into the mix, be it volcanic ash or rice or, whatever thing it was. But the thing is that people have been really interested in these plasters from a perspective, archaeologists have been interested in them from the perspective of, what is this plaster? Is it like what is it made from? Is it gypsum or is it a lime plaster? Is it made from rocks? Does it have shells in it? Does the plaster have anything in it that, we want to look at so that we can use that thing to learn more about? So for example, a piece of pottery or plant remains. But the thing is that the actual production process, I think, can tell us even more than we already know about how people were doing this. And it's just a matter of really digging into the production process and not the final products that becomes important, because, who knows what we could learn? We could learn that, some cultures were making their lime by heating the rock to a much lower temperature, which would be really useful because it would use less resources. So you have to sort of connect a lot of dots to figure out how this works. But the ubiquity of concrete, the fact that I can, move my head slightly and see a concrete, someone's porch and the skyscraper being built down the way, it's everywhere. And researching, understanding how, we can proceed on the planet with the climate being what it is and how human activity impacts the landscape now. In order to really get a good handle on that, I firmly believe, as do many others, that you can't just start with what is the environmental impact now. You have to go back to when humans started impacting the environment severely. And that could be as early as the Roman mining of lead. There's evidence in these really famous ice core samples from Greenland that lead smelting in the Roman Empire left a noticeable mark on the world's atmosphere. Maybe it's that far back. Maybe it's with the creation of ceramics. I mean, there's this big idea that maybe cow farts are causing most of our problems. So maybe we got to go back to the beginning of agriculture. But as small of a part of that story of humans impacting the landscape that making concrete might have been in the past, it's a really big part now. Yeah. And so get the whole picture, not just the modern picture.
That's incredible. That's a fantastic answer. If I was a government body, I would give you money. So
Sometimes they do.
I hope that they give you more. Oh my gosh, Hannah, thank you so much. I think everybody is now a concrete stan, and
If they're not, they should be.
If they, yeah, exactly. I need to make like t-shirts, like I stand concrete or something like that.
I would buy that. I would be like, it's really quite funny. Like I was at this conference, and someone in that city was like at a craft fair, and they were selling earrings that were made from concrete. And I was like, my God, I need these little orange things because it's just everywhere, and I love it. It is also kind of nice to be studying concrete, because I can be like, if someone's trying to talk to me and I'm like, I don't really want to make small talk with this person, they'd be like, oh, I heard you're an archaeologist. And I'm like, yeah, I study concrete. And it's just like, oh, bye.
Oh, okay, it's so fun. I think somebody over there is calling me, but little do they know what excitement they're missing out on. But now we know, all of the delicious donuts know, and I just can't thank you enough for coming on today and telling us about your research, telling us what it's like to be an archaeologist, and really letting us in on this 12,000-year-old magic, basically.
Yeah, I agree. Magic.
Yeah, that connects us with today, the past, and 12,000 years ago. So, Hannah, I really appreciate it. And I hope you had as good of a time telling us about concrete as we did listening.
As many people as I can tell, but also, I really enjoy your show. So it's nice to be able to positively contribute in that way. So
thank you. I appreciate it. So that will wrap us up today. I think you really left us with a lot to think about, a lot to ponder about concrete, and a way that we can kind of feel connected to history every day. I'm a big proponent of, finding the history, because it's all around you. And when you go walk outside today, which you should go outside every day if you can, touch grass and also touch concrete. We're going to add that to the list. Touch some grass, touch some concrete, feel connected to history.
Indeed. Yeah. Thanks for letting me share with all of the good fun facts.
Of course, Hannah. Thank you. And to close us out today, is there anything that you're working on? Is there anything that you'd like to plug at the end? Any final thoughts for you?
I have done all sorts of different things in terms of public outreach, like talking to you on this public podcast, because I love it. Part of some of the things that I've done have been being part of the program called Skype a Scientist. And it is program where it's mostly school teachers that use it. People who do like after school clubs, or school teachers, or even some at prisons and things like that. They can go online to this website and be matched up with a scientist who's willing to come into their classroom virtually and talk to them about what they do. And so I've gotten to talk to lots of classrooms about, being a geoarchaeologist and things like that. And I think it's a thing more people should know about, because I know that there are tons of teachers out there who want to share these kinds of things with their students, but just might not actually know a scientist. So this website helps you do that. And I enjoy being, a scientist that people can talk to.
Yeah, awesome. If there's any teachers out there who would like to have Hannah in their classroom, would that be okay for them to contact you?
Yeah, anyone who wants to talk to me about anything, be that concrete. Hannah, can you call me and talk to me about concrete for like 20 minutes? But yeah, they can definitely, I will make sure that you have my website link, which has my email and some of the other public outreach work I've done. Spoiler, it includes coloring pages and, activity books that I've done for kids on different subjects. And I'd love to do one of those about ancient technology. So I'll send you that link, and anyone can ponder the greatness and beauty and scientific magic of concrete, and we can talk more about that way.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And of course, I will put everything that Hannah talked about today in the show notes. And if you're listening on the audio only version, I'll put pictures up on the website so that you can see all of the cool, because you've got to see these pictures. These pictures are really, really cool. So you'll be able to see everything on the website and in the show notes. So thank you so much, Hannah. I appreciate you for doing the things that you do and just contributing to this awesome field of archaeology. So thank you again, and I will see you, Delicious Donut, in the outro. Bye.
Well, dear one, thank you so much for listening to today's episode. It was such a blast to have Hannah on, and we will definitely be having her on the podcast again to talk about other cool archaeology stuff. So thank you again to Hannah for joining us today and imparting all of her concrete-related wisdom. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider leaving a rating or review. We're still trying to make our 200 ratings goal by the end of this year. Fingers crossed that we can do it by the end of this season. That is so helpful in helping spreading the word about the podcast. You can also let me know what you think about this episode in particular by using Spotify's question and answer feature, which I can now reply to you. I can reply now to the comments that you leave on individual episodes, which I'm very excited about. So I'm slowly going through those and replying to each one because I appreciate you spending the time to leave a comment on the episode. So if you would like to do that, that'd be great. If you want to support the podcast in other ways, you can join us over on Patreon. We have a bunch of bonus spooky season things going on over there. We'll have updates on live scary storytelling coming at the end of this month. There are a whole bunch of bonus episodes about different Japanese scary stories. We've got early releases of episodes. We've got bonus episodes. We've got sleepy history. We've got a lot of stuff over there. And I would like to thank all of the Patreon members. Their names are gliding over the screen right now. So thank you so much for supporting us over there. You can join us over there at any time, starting at just $2 a month. And if there's anything else I forgot, I'm sure it's in the show notes. So I will see you next week when we talk about another Empress baddie. Drink your water. Do something kind for yourself. Please take care of yourself. It is hot. It is stressful. I know it's back to school for many people. So please do something to relax and take care of yourself. Take care of your body and your brain and all of the other parts that you have. And I will see you next week. Okay, talk to you later. Love you. Bye.